game against Sergei Karyakin, an extremely strong super grandmaster who has beaten nearly everyone. But this didn't scare Magnus, and with both players having 3 minutes on the clock, Magnus quickly started the game playing his pawn to e4, which Sergei responded to with e5. And after the first few developing moves, the position quickly turns into the Roy Lopez opening, which Magnus is more than familiar with. After trading the knight and bishop, Magnus instantly develops his knight, knowing exactly what to do. Sergei then castles, making Magnus consider options for a few seconds before castling his own king. After a few more moves being played, Magnus attacks Sergei's knight, which Sergei attacks and Magnus moves back, making Sergei think for a very long time before playing his pawn to g5. A big mistake. Magnus plays his pawn to g4, attacking Sergei's bishop, and while the best move for Sergei here is to take Magnus's bishop, he retreats. Another mistake. This is the beginning of the end for Sergei, and after moving his bishop back, Magnus starts launching a huge attack, quickly bringing his pieces closer and closer to Sergei's wide-open king. After Sergei moves his knight to e6, Magnus takes the open file, planning to use it to attack Sergei's king. Sergei knows he's in trouble. Now spending more time thinking, and after trading 2 knights and bishops, the two exchange a few more moves before Magnus trades rooks, bringing his queen in the game, which after Sergei attacks, Magnus plays queen g6 check, winning a pawn, and then winning a rook exchange. And after a few more shuffling pieces, Magnus delivers the final blow, moving his pawn to f6, which threatens checkmate after queen g7, completely destroying Sergei's chances at beating Magnus. But after the entire game, Magnus still had nearly 2 minutes left on his clock, spending only around a minute to defeat the Super Grandmaster. But this is nothing compared to Magnus's match with FIDE Master Espen Agdestein. Magnus starts with moving his pawn to g3, which Agdestein responds to with d5, the King's Fianchetto opening. After both players develop their starting pieces, Magnus strikes the center, moving his pawn to e4. A few more pieces are developed before both players castle, and a set of pawns are traded off. Magnus here plays c4, aggressively pressuring his opponent to take the pawn. Agdestein starts tapping the table impatiently with a piece. A few moves after, and Magnus brings his knights into the game, having them both lining up to Agdestein's king, about to prepare a deadly attack. After playing his pawn to h6, and Magnus bringing his queen in, Agdestein makes a grave error, taking Magnus's knight, allowing Magnus to bring his rook into the game. Magnus then lines up his rook to Agdestein's king, looking for checkmating possibilities. Agdestein then moves his king to h8, allowing Magnus to grab a free pawn before trading the knight and bishop, bringing his queen closer to Agdestein's king. Magnus is now just looking for the killer move, which he finds after moving his rook to g6, which after Agdestein thinks about, defends by moving his knight to f6, which does nothing. Magnus takes Agdestein's pawn with his bishop before forcing a trade in pieces, allowing Magnus to deliver a forced checkmate. Magnus Carlsen only used 18 seconds to destroy this chess master. But in Magnus Carlsen's next game, he was about to defeat Bill Gates, the richest man alive, while only using 12 seconds on the clock. Bill Gates, having the white pieces, confidently started with e4. Magnus responds by moving his knight to c6 before Bill moves his knight to f3. Magnus plays d5, quickly pressuring Gates to either take his pawn or be taken, which Gates responds to with a third option, defending the pawn with his bishop. Magnus starts with knight f6, adding more pressure on Gates' pawn, before the d and e pawns are finally traded off, bringing Magnus' queen into the equation. Magnus' pieces were starting to come active, while Gates' pieces seemed pretty passive. Gates then attacks Magnus' queen, which Magnus almost immediately moves out of the way. This move seems to confuse Bill Gates. Looking at the chessboard, not being able to see which move to play, it's in this position Bill Gates decides to castle. The worst possible move in the position, with Magnus' pieces already surrounding his king. Magnus plays bishop g3, putting a double pin on Gates' queen, while also threatening some nasty attacks. Magnus instantly brings his knight in. He takes Magnus' seemingly free bishop, which Magnus expects, and while everything seems safe to Gates, the position is completely lost. And with Gates taking Magnus' knight, like a complete beginner, Magnus Carlsen delivers the final move, queen h2 checkmate.
Oh, that was quick. Oh, that was bad.
He managed to defeat the richest man in the world in only 9 moves, using less than 12 seconds. But Magnus's next feat is much more impressive, as when facing a famous explorer named Lars Monsen, who is also a very strong chess player, Magnus would only have a few seconds on his clock to checkmate his next famous opponent. Magnus starts the game by moving his pawn to e4, which his opponent responds to with c5, the Sicilian defense, and after their starting pieces are developed, Magnus starts the first move of his attack, moving his knight to a square looking to fork Monsen's pieces, forcing a trade, bringing his queen into the game. Already, Monsen is in a bout of trouble, attacking Magnus's queen, which Magnus retreats before both players develop a few more pieces and Monsen castles. After Monsen moves, Magnus starts pushing pawns towards Monsen's king, creating a big attack. Monsen spends a lot of his time thinking before retreating his knight, allowing Magnus to bring his knight in and push his pawn before trading off knights, taking Monsen's pawn. If Monsen takes this pawn, he's in big trouble, as Magnus's rook would come in, causing problems for his king. Monsen pushes his pawn forward, but Magnus brings his rook into the game before taking another pawn, then bringing his queen closer towards Monsen's king. And after a couple more moves, Monsen places queen to f7, allowing Magnus to capture it for free. A queen blunder. It is at this moment Monsen drops the clock, wasting a few seconds of Magnus's clock time before Magnus surrounds Monsen's king and promotes his pawn to a queen, checkmating Monsen as soon as he runs out of time on the clock. The players shake hands, with Monsen knowing Magnus had completely outplayed him in a matter of seconds.